Hey, hello. Welcome to this to this session about the FHIR REST API. I'm going to tell you some stuff about the REST API. I hope you have read through the introduction. Well, we'll just continue. Who am I? I'm Abel Enthoven. I work for FHIR, and I'm a technical specialist there. At FHIR, we make, of course, this event. This is what we organize, but we also make some products like Vonk and Forge. Those are products I work on, and we also have Simplifier. So I'm going to tell you something about the FHIR RESTful API. This is really the description of the web service that is a FHIR server. So it's a RESTful web service using the REST way of communicating, and it's really the front end of a FHIR server. Because a FHIR server contains resources, it's comparable to a data or graph SQL or ORDS in the way that you can store and retrieve resources from the server. And it has, of course, the FHIR resources as a data model. On the right side, you see a couple of test FHIR servers that you can; those are public, and you can reach them from your own computer. You can just use them as test servers. You see some Vonk in there. That's our server, but you also have the HL7 test server, test.fhir.org, and the HAPI test server. Now, in my presentation, I will never use the server. I will just say a get/patient if I mean get endpoint/patient. So you can substitute that. So what's this presentation about? Well, I'm going to tell you some things about creation, updating, and deleting of resources, so-called CRUD operations. And I will also tell you something about transactions, validation, and concurrency when you work with FHIR servers. And then there's also the other part where you have already stored your resources and you want them to get them out, to fetch them. You can do that with a FHIR API, and you can use search for that, or you can fetch a single resource. And also resource versions, what we're going to talk about, and include other resources. So how do you create a resource in a FHIR server? Well, we use the method post, of course, because that's standard HTTP. When we post something, then it's going to be something new and it's going to be stored. In FHIR, the resource ID is always assigned by the server. So if you have a resource, then you post that, then you get an ID back. And the ID is available in the location header, and I'll show you right now what happens there. So you're looking at sort of a REST client here. It's comparable to Postman. You would normally do that in something like Postman. And you see that I do a post to a server, which is my local host. I'm running Vonk locally. And on the patient resource endpoint, I'm using FHIR and JSON as my content type. As you can see, I have a very simple patient here with ID 1. It is Mr. Timberlake. Well, you know him all, I guess. And we're gonna just kick off this request against our FHIR server, and then we have a result here. As you can see, the patient has been stored, so that's what you get back. You get the stored patient back. What you see here is that there is an ID assigned to the patient. So you see that it's GUID in this case. Vonk assigns GUIDs. Other servers will maybe assign other types of IDs. And also what you see on the bottom of the result is the meta section. And you can see that the resource has a version, and it also gives a last updated time. The version we'll be talking about later. Then also interesting are the headers of the return. You can see that it will always give you back a location. That's the location where you can reach the resource that you've just stored. And an e-tag, and we will talk about the e-tag later because it's used for concurrency. Okay, I should go back because this patient that I just posted has gotten this ID, and this ID can be used to create another resource that is referencing the patient. So I'm going to create an observation now that is referencing the patient. So I'm going to just change this into the ID that I received. And this is going to be an observation that is part of the patient. So, yeah. So this is the way to connect two resources together. If you already have an ID, then you can also use that ID, of course. But in this case, we got a new ID. So that's what I'm using. Okay, that was creating a resource. And there's different ways actually of creating a resource. I used a post just now, but you can also use a put to create a resource. A put is sort of an absurd, as it's called in database country, as we see it. So we can use a put to either create or to update a resource. So if it exists, it's completely replaced, and you get an OK back. If it does not exist, it is created, and it uses your ID, the ID that you supply. So that's also a difference from the post. You can supply your own ID in this case. So I'm going to do that. I'm going to do a put on the patient with number 1. You can see that in the put, in the location of the put, there's also a 1 at the end. So that's a difference, because when I used the post, I did a post on just patient, and I have to use the 1 behind it. So as you can see, I have this patient, which is, hey, it's a singer as well. It has ID 1, and I want to create this patient. So I'm gonna just run this. I see in the result that it actually did create a patient, because the patient was not already there. You see a 201 created at the top, and that's because the patient was not there. If I do it again, so I can recreate the patient, so to speak, then of course you will get another result. I'll do it again. Now you get a 200 OK, and it means okay, the patient was already there and I replaced it. Okay, there's also a method to partially update a resource, and it's called patch. It uses the HTTP method patch, which is quite a difficult method, because it has some problems. You will have to be really sure about the fields that you're updating, if they go well together with the other fields that are already there. So you update only selected elements and not the entire resource. What you could use it for is in situations where you don't have, for example, access to the entire resource. So if you have only gotten a partial resource with your get, then you only have those fields. So if you want to update those fields only, then you could use patch. And also in situations where you have a low bandwidth situation like mobile or whatever. I haven't made an example of this because people use it not a lot, because of the difficulty, and also not many servers implement it. For Vonk implements it now, so you could try it on Vonk and also on some other servers. Okay, then a method that you will probably also rarely use, because mostly in care situations you will not do real deletes. You would mostly say, okay, this is inactive or whatever. The delete in FHIR is implemented in a way that it always returns success. So if it's not there, it still returns success. So you would not know whether or not it was already there. Be aware of the fact that when you delete a resource, then there will always be a previous version in the database. So if you delete it, the previous version will always stay in the database in FHIR. So you will have to be aware of that when you are using HIPAA or GDPR, because you didn't really delete the data, you just made it inactive, really. So I'm going to do a delete of patient 2. You didn't see patient 2 yet, but I made it already. I'm going to do that, and it returns no content. So yeah, that's normally what you want. You want to just delete it, and that's it. And then still there's still a version still in the database. Okay, then we can get to the interesting part, because normally you would, for example, if you have a screen and you're editing a patient or you're editing different resources in the same screen, you will probably want to use a bundle to post those resources, because you could do it then atomically. So if one fails, then all fail, and that's a very nice thing to have in the land of applications. So a bundle that you would use for a batch contains a collection of requests. So it contains a post and a put and a delete. It can all be in the same bundle, and those requests will be fired as if they were regular requests that you would fire one by one. The rule in FHIR is that the requests are processed in order, so in the order of the way you put them in the bundle. Also, you immediately would see some problems, because when you do a post, as you saw before, you don't have the ID yet. So you will have to get the ID first and then use that in a resource that references the first. So you can only do that if you can make some sort of temporary ID, and that's possible within FHIR. I will show you in the next slide how to do that. There's also a difference between batches. They're both called batch, but one has a type batch and it is processed non-atomically. That means that most servers will be able to do that. And so the request is processed non-atomically. It means that if one fails, the other will probably go through. So that's not very handy, to be honest. So I would always recommend to use a type transaction, which is processed atomically. So I've got a transaction here. It's a resource type bundle, and it has an ID bundle transaction, and the type is transaction. That's how FHIR says it should be. And then we have some resources in here. As you can see, there's a patient in here. He's called Fats Domino, also a singer. He has a very weird ID, as you can see. The full URL of the patient is this, and that's a temporary URL. So that's what I told you about before. If you want to connect resources inside a bundle to each other, then you would have to assign a temporary ID or a temporary URL and use that URL somewhere else in a resource that references the first. So you see that I defined it here. If we go down, there's also an observation in the bundle, and it references the first by this very weird looking UUID. So these two resources will be connected together when I do a post. So I'll just do the post. And I'll just look at the results here. It's normal that the FHIR server will return the results that it has created. So it has the resources that were created are in the bundle that I get in the transaction response, as you see here. The bundle is also of the type transaction response. You see those resources here. And this patient has gotten an ID, of course, because the server assigned an ID. And it starts with 565, just as people always say about GUIDs, 565. We'll just check it here, but in the reference. And we see that it indeed references patient 565, blah, 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 blah. That's good. So the observation is attached to the patient, and they both got new IDs. Okay, then if you post resources to a FHIR server, the FHIR server will check your resource against a data model. So normally, when you post a resource, there's a few layers of validation. And I have to say that tomorrow at 2 o'clock Central European time, Graham Grieve will also talk about validation. He has the use and limits of validation. That's tomorrow. I really recommend that you go there, because he goes into depth about this. I will just tell you the basics. So one of the first things that will be checked is the data format, the serialization format. In this case, it's application JSON, but FHIR servers also implement XML, most of them. So in this case, it will check whether or not it starts with this is sort of the minimal JSON resource that you see here. And then it will start checking for the FHIR basics. And now a FHIR resource always has a resource type. That's one of the things that it's mandatory. So you will always have a resource type inside a FHIR resource. So that's what it will check for. Of course, then you get a sort of a layer extra where FHIR defines resources. As you have already seen, we have patient, we have observations, we have procedures, and whatever more. Then, of course, the resource type has to be one of those. So it has to be one of those declared resource types. In this case, the patient, as you see. And that's the next check. And it will also check for all the fields in the patient. So if, for example, the patient would have a mandatory field, then the validation, and you would not include it, and then the validation would give you a warning. And then there's a fourth layer, really, and that's profiles. In FHIR, you can define profiles, and profiles are sort of it's sort of an how do you call that? A profile it's on top of the patient, so it sort of makes the patient more strict, and it makes it even. It has extra checks on the patient. So in this case, I've used a profile from the Indian FHIR authority, as you can see. So that's the next layer. Okay, I'm just going to post a resource that is not okay, and it's not okay because it's missing a field. I'm just gonna post it. As you can see, I get an operation outcome. That's the standard way for FHIR to communicate a problem. In this case, it's an error. It's a severity error. And that's because the instance count for observation status is null, which is not within the specified cardinality, because observation is a mandatory field in observation. Observation status is a mandatory field, and it's not here. So I will have to edit to make this work. So I'm just gonna change this a little bit and say status. Oh, all of a sudden I can't type anymore. In this case, it's final. I'm gonna do it again. Hey, now it works. So now I have the right observation in the database. Okay, as we already saw in the response, there are certain fields that are interesting in the headers section. You already saw the location. The location points to the location where the resource is created. And there's also a header that's called content type. You know that from standard HTTP, of course. That's a serialization format. FHIR has a few serialization formats. I'm going to talk about that later. As you can see here, there's always FHIR in this format. And there's an e-tag is also an interesting field because it helps you with optimistic concurrency. I'm also going to talk about that later. There's also possibilities to change the return that you get, the HTTP content that you get. In this case, we use the prefer header in the request. So if you use prefer return minimal, then you get nothing really. That's what I did with the delete. So if you do say return representation, then you get the resource. So the resource that you just posted or put. And if you choose operation outcome, you'll get this beautiful operation outcome resource that I just showed you. And it's really the operation outcome for something that goes right is very small because it will just say everything is okay. Okay, about the serialization format. So the serialization format for FHIR is always one of these three. So you have the turtle, you have the XML, and you've got JSON. Turtle is not implemented by every server. It's also not implemented by Vonk. But in this case, so these three are the possibilities. You can put the format in your URL, so you can ask for a certain format in your URL. In this case, I say patient1, and I want the format application FHIR plus turtle. When you get a response, then you have content type application FHIR plus turtle, and then FHIR version is 4 is here, and that's because the FHIR server assumed that you meant FHIR version 4, and it, I mean that's something that the FHIR server implements or doesn't. So in this case, because you left it out, you could also use it, as in the second example, where you say accept application / FHIR plus XML semicolon FHIR version is 3. Then you explicitly ask for a version, and you get that version, as you can see. And there's a third possibility where you use it on your endpoint. As you saw before in my examples, I used R4/patient. And it's because some endpoints are only meant for a certain FHIR version, in this case, R4. So that's what happened here. Okay, about concurrency, really FHIR uses the standard HTTP concurrency patterns. When you get an E tag or a last modified back, then you can use that as a key in your concurrency request. So if you would want to do that, for example, if you would want to use an E tag, then you would have to say if match, and then use that E tag in your if match header. And what it does is it checks your E tag against the E tag that is stored with the resource. And if it's the same, then it will go through with the operation. If it's not the same, it will just fail. And that's called optimistic concurrency, of course, because you're just trying it. You have this E tag that you got back from the server because you did a get before. And you use this E tag to check whether or not it's still the same when you do a put or something. And if it's not the same, then apparently some other user or some other system has changed it. So you can try it again. You can get the resource again and use the if match again and see whether or not it will go through that time. Okay, we're going to talk about fetching resources. This example is about fetching one resource. So you could do a get patient /1, then you would get patient1. You can also do it another way. You can also say get patient ID is 1. And really, there's no difference in terms of results. You always get one patient, but in the second example, you are doing a search and you get a bundle back. So in the first situation, you get only a single patient back, and the second situation, you get a bundle back because you are doing a search. You're telling FHIR that you're doing a search, and a search can always yield more than one result. Okay, so I'm just gonna do a get on a single patient. Really easy. I already had that patient, and you see that I changed the format to XML just to show you that it's possible. So what I get back is exactly the patient that I posted before in the piece that I showed you before. And that's a very simple one, of course. So as I told you before, with the delete operation, resources always have a history. So in the FHIR database, there's multiple versions of a resource normally when you've changed it. So every time you change a resource, a new version is created, and it's stacked on top of the other resources that were already there. So yeah, you have, like, for example, this patient that I already posted and deleted and posted again. It has multiple versions of that resource. So you can always look at the resource of a single patient, for example. So if you say get patient1 history, then you get the history of patient1. If you say get patient /history, then you get the history of all the patients. That's going to be a huge list. It's possible that you can use that for example, to update some other system. Yeah, you can also, the latter one is history for the entire database. So you could also use that if you wanted to update another system from your database. Of course, that's an operation that you will normally not do. Sometimes you can do it if you filter on last updated. So if you would, for example, do /history and you would say question mark last updated is now or a week ago, then you would get only the results from a week ago until now. So you would have the changes, so to speak, since that time. And that can be really useful. Now you can also get a single history item by just using the ID of the history item. So that's interesting when you do auditing, for example. So this whole history thing is interesting for you can use it for polling synchronization, as I told you before. So if you want only the history or the changes since a certain time. And you can also use it for auditing. So audit events, for example, they are also resources stored in the database. Some of the systems like Vonk can do that automatically for you. So if you post a resource, then an audit event is created as well. And this audit event is always connected to one of the versions of a resource. So you can also see what it points to. And you could also use history, of course, to have some sort of undo functionality in your application. Okay, then about the search. Search is quite something, and I'm going to just go over it a little bit. If you want to know more about the search, you can also go to the advanced search presentation of René Vonk on Thursday at 15:15, and you can watch that. He's going to go into real depth about that. So how would you do a search? Well, you do a get on in this case a patient, and you use the question mark to specify the parameters. In this case, I have used family Enthoven, that's my family, and birth date, that's my birth date. And I would get back all the patients that have a family name of Enthoven and this particular birth date. And that's very nice. You can do that using a get, and you can also use it, using a form post. And actually, the form post is a little bit safer because in some situations, some servers, some systems, they will store your URL somewhere in the logs, for example. And if you have, in this case, there's family Enthoven birthday 1975-12-21, that's actually a unique person. That's me, because there's only so many Enthovens in the Netherlands, as you see on this map on the right. So you would identify me in your logs, and that's not really nice. So I would recommend to use a form post instead. And if you use a form post, then you will have to use this content type application / the form encoded www form encoded format, and the content can just be the same search string that you used before, but then without the patient part. So that's the same operation, but it's just in different ways. Okay, so about the search parameters, you've seen a few search parameters already. Actually, search parameters are defined for all resource sources in the FHIR standard. So there are a few default search parameters: ID, profile, and type, for example. ID you saw before, and profile and type are also applicable to all resources in FHIR. And then, of course, there are every resource also defines search parameters, like patient name, as you saw before, observation code, and you can also define your own search parameters. Then you are already doing some extra stuff. That's probably not something that you would start with, but it's something that can be done. So you can define your own search parameters on resources, and you can actually also define your own resources. So that's for the future. Parameter types is a different story. Every parameter has a type, like name, for example, has the type string. And every type of parameter has some limitations. I've included a cheat sheet in this presentation, so you can read about that yourself. when you get the presentation. It's going to be available for you. I'm not going to talk about it because it's going to be a too long a story. So I'm just going to do a search, in this case on a name. I'm just going to find my resource that I previously posted. As you can see, it returns a bundle, and the bundle has a type search set in this case. So it's different from the things that I showed you before. And you get all the matching patients with the name Aretha, as you can see here. In this case, it's only one patient. It's Aretha Franklin. And you see that in a search bundle, you also have a link part where if you have, for example, multiple pages of results, you can link to the next page. It's the standard mechanism for FHIR to do paging with results. What you can also see here is that the location that you get back here on top also specifies what kind of search you did. So in this case, you get back a count of 10. So there are maximum 10 resources in one page and a skip of 0. So you get it from the first. If the skip would be 10, then you would get the second page. No, already did that. Okay, and then there's also search parameter modifiers. As you saw before, I just said name is Aretha, but you can also constrain it a little bit more. You can also, in this case, say patient, family, semicolon, exact is Enthoven. So you can do an exact match, because a lot of servers allow, for example, if you do name, then they allow Enthoven without a capital 2. But if you do exact, then you would get only Enthovens with the capital E. And there's also other possibilities for modifiers. In this case, you see patient colon missing is true. That means, okay, get all the observations where the patient is missing. So that's another way of getting other results. Those are also included on the cheat sheet, so you can read about those later too. And then there's the third one, and that's the value prefixes. In this case, they're only valid for ordered parameter types, so numbers, dates, quantities, and that's because you do a comparison between the value and the value in the resource. The prefixes are based on range comparison. So, for example, the date 2019-11 is really November of 2019. So that's an entire month. And it will go from the first of the month to the last of the month. That's the range that you're searching for. So if you would do a greater than or a less than, then you would calculate that on the entire month. So for example, you see here that patient birth date is greater or equal, and then the birth date, then you will get all the patients that are in that day. So you would get them from 0 to 23 hours, 59 minutes. So that's the range that you're looking for. In this case, it's a birth date, so it won't matter, but in other cases, it's more interesting. So there's also a possibility to go outside of your resource. You're searching on a resource and you want to go into another resource. In this case, for example, you're searching for observations, but you really don't want to use any field of the observation. You want to go to the patient that is referenced by the observation. So in this case, I will have all the observations that have a patient that reference a patient where the family name is Enthoven and the birth date is my birth date. So I get all my observations. There's also a possibility to include resources using include or ref include. That means that if you do a search and you get only observations and you would like to include the patient in your result, then you could use this. In this case, you can of course only refer to parameters of the type reference, and you can include those references. I'm just gonna go on because I don't have so much time. So I'm going to do this search on patient Timberlake, and I do a ref include, which means that I do a reverse include. So I'm including. So I'm searching on the patient, and I'm including all the observations that belong to the patient in this case, because I do a ref include. I do an include as seen from the observation. So I'm just going to run this. Here it is. So as you can see, I have a patient here. That's Domino. And he has, let me see, has also Aretha Franklin. Hey, that's weird. Patients that don't have the name Timberlake. Okay. Well, it doesn't matter. I would normally expect that I would only get patients named Timberlake and their observations in this case. Okay, there's one last thing that I want to tell you, and it's a capability statement. If you want to know what a server is capable of, so whether it can, for example, do upserts, then you can ask for the capability statement, and you do that at /metadata. Every server implements that, and you can just browse through that metadata and see what you want to know. You can also use that, for example, to progressively use better or faster methods that you want to use. So you could fall back to slower methods, for example, if it's not implemented, and to automatically hide functionality. Okay, if you want to know more, because we're already nearing the end, you can find me here. You can reach me on the Hoover app. If you want to know, for example, about security or other things that I've talked about into more detail, you can also always send me an email. This email address is, of course, in the presentation that you will receive. So are there any questions?
Abel, this is Michael, and yes, there are roughly 6 questions in the QA.
Okay, nice. We're going to see how many I can answer.
All right, so I'll read the first one. It says, will the metadata be updated by the server, or is the user dev responsible for that?
It depends on the server, to be honest, because the Vonk server, for example, it will update the metadata if you add operations, for example. And for some stuff, you have to do it yourself, but then you're already building a plugin. So it depends very much on the server, would be my answer. Okay,
very good. All right, second question. Do you support JSON patch or JSON merge patch for patching resources? Sorry.
FHIR says that you have to implement that. I'm not sure whether Vonk implements it. I will have to look that up. So I'm gonna answer that question later in the comments, if it's okay.
Yes, sounds great. Thank you.
Yeah.
Next question, what are the other types of bundle which can be posted to FHIR server except batch and transaction type?
Well, those bundles with transaction and batch, those have a special meaning. So you could post them to the root endpoint. You can also post a normal bundle, like you would post a patient, for example. So you could fill a bundle with whatever you like to be in there, with all kinds of entries. And then you could post that bundle and just store it as a bundle. So that's another possibility. I don't know of any other special possibilities at the moment. No.
Okay. All right. And then another question. What are the other types of, oh, that was the same question, jumped. Is there no way to search with or? An example, family equal tran or name equal tran. One has to do separate calls and combine and receiver end, on receiver end, right? Can be quite inefficient depending upon the complexity of and implementation of the search.
Yeah, no, you can search using OR. I didn't include that because it's going to be too difficult and going to take too much time. But if you want to know more, please go to René Spronk. He has this talk about advanced search. It's on Thursday, and he will probably talk about that. And it's actually also in the documentation. I've also put a link here, as you can see in this this last page, hs7.org/FHIR/HTTP. It's also in there.
All right, very good. And looks like one or two more questions. So if I want to post a bunch of observations in one go, I would use batch with the bundle. Is there no way then to use the client provided ID, or should the client then look at the order of the results to figure out which new resource ID belongs to which old ID?
I think it means that if you post a bundle, what is the return going to look like? Is that correct?
I believe so.
Yeah. Normally, when you would post observations, for example, for example, if you post 3 observations, you would get a bundle of observation results back, and this bundle will be in exactly the same order as the ones that you posted. So you would be able to extract the IDs from those.
Okay, very good. What type of bundle as a response will be returned in case of batch type bundle?
It will be a batch result. Yeah, in this case, a transaction result. There will be a batch result type bundle. Yeah.
Okay, very good. More questions coming in. So if FHIR does not support HATEOAS, HATEOAS, can you really call it RESTful?
I'm not sure what it means.
Yeah, I'm not either.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's like hate OAS. Yeah. All right. Yeah,
okay,
we'll
I'm going to answer that. I'm going to answer that later. We'll have a chat
Okay.
about that. Yeah.
Okay. How can we retrieve an appointment details from slot/schedule resource, as I don't find the appointment reference details in slot or schedule?
Can you repeat that?
Yes. How can we retrieve appointment details from slot/schedule resource, as I don't find the appointment reference details in slot or schedule?
Right. Well, you can use the ref include version. So if you have a reference, it doesn't matter in what direction it points. So if one resource references another resource, you can also query from the other resource. So for example, if an observation references a patient, then you can also query on the patient, as you saw before in my example. I'll just go back. See that? Yeah, this one. So I'm querying the patient here, but I'm using ref include to connect the observation to the patient. So in this case, there's not a link from patient to observation. There's only a link from observation to patient. So this would be the way to query those resources.
Okay, very good. I think we have time for at least one more.
Go on.
If you want to learn more about communication with a FHIR server, I recommend the following sessions. Oh, sorry.
Yeah, that's mine. Yeah.
Oh, here's another one. Rephrasing my previous question, is there no way to use client provided IDs if posting a bundle of observations?
Right. Yeah. That's a good one. No, there isn't. Because the FHIR server will just simply ignore the ID that you provide when you do a post. So actually, when I'm doing any work with the FHIR server with Postman, using Postman, I would always use put, because it's so much easier. And of course, the negative side of put is that it will also replace a resource if it's already there. But yeah, I guess it's a balance. And you're right, and it's probably not completely restful. Yeah.
Okay, very good. All right, I think that's it for today. We're at the top of the hour.
Yeah, I see it. Yeah. Thank you very much. Thank you all very much for watching. and see you hopefully in the rest of the dev days.
Thank you.
Thank you.